Hey there, welcome back to Braining Book Dragon. So today I'm going to be talking about Eragon and Eldest, the first two books in the Inheritance Cycle series by Christopher Paolini. And he just came out with another book called Murtagh. It's going to be essentially book 5 in the Eragon series. And people are really excited about it. It is a rather large book, but all of these are pretty decent size books. Apparently, he started writing this series when he was a teenager, which is great to know. But one of the things that I've noticed as I'm reading through the series is that it is written in a somewhat immature way. So there are a lot of things here that could have been improved upon. Getting all the way through book 1, and I'm almost done with book 2. I'm about 75-80% done with book 2, and I am full on marking and annotating in the books as I go. So I'm reading them more deeply than someone just, reading them for enjoyment. But I have to say that the entire first book of Eragon essentially acts as an introduction to the series as a whole. And as an introduction, it is hefty. There's a lot of information that is introduced in the story, which is great. If you're just looking to delve deeply into a world and because you want to escape, this is a great option. I mean, if you are a huge fan of Tolkien and Brandon Sanderson and everything, these are great books to just dive into headfirst. I would recommend keeping a pen on you or a notebook or post-it notes or something to kind of keep track of some of the things in the book, because there are some really important things that are brought up. Of course, the magic system is explained quite in depth throughout the story. And then, of course, because our main character, Eragon, so there are going to be tons of spoilers in, in this discussion. Let's just go ahead and say that there are tons of spoilers for Eragon and Eldest. I have not read Brisingar or Inheritance yet, so this is just going to be, and like I said, I haven't even finished Eldest. This is just kind of feedback on what I've read so far. But you definitely want to read these with some kind of way to mark information as you find it, because this is, like I said, because it acts as an introduction to the series as a whole. There's a lot of information they toss at you. Was it as well planned as it could have been? Absolutely not. Is it good writing for a teenage kid? Yeah. I mean, if you look at it through those lenses, yeah, it's very well written for somebody of that age bracket. There are some things that come through, like I said, as an immature style of writing, just because, I started marking all of the questions that Eragon asks through the book, and it showcases the fact that the information is really broken down into extremely simple points, which does get kind of frustrating, because at that point I kind of wish that our main character just kept a notebook of his own and wrote some of these things down. He also brings up in the first book here in Eragon, we have where there is a fortune teller. Her name is Angela, and she gives him essentially 4 different prophecies of what to expect in Eragon's lifetime. So that kind of tells us things that are going to happen throughout the series. It's well described as far as a fortune telling session goes. I'm glad that they had something a little bit mystical, because this is a fantasy. I was really hoping for more magic as a whole, because I feel like we're so separated from the magic. Because, I mean, Eragon has to say things in what is called, an ancient language in order to utilize magic in ways. And that's great, but there's also a lot of stuff that we're not quite getting. By the way, reader's note here, if you are going to read these books, I encourage you to do so with the physical book in tandem with the audiobook so that you can pause the audiobook and check the back of the book for the English translations of the ancient language phrases. I read the entire first book without knowing that the ancient language is decoded in the back of the book. Yeah. I actually had a student who had already read the book point that out to me, and I was absolutely taken aback, going, well, that would have helped to know. So again, like I said, it is a reader's note there. Make sure that you are aware that you can pause your audiobook and check the information in the back. There are actually three languages that are referred to. There's the ancient language, the dwarf language, and the Urgal language for the first book. So you do run into a lot of phrases that are written in that ancient language. And we also have two different monster types. There's one called the Urgals, which has their language reference to in the back. And then there's also the Razak. Now, there is going to be also a content warning, like a trigger warning for this first book. There was one scene that was very graphic. Obviously, there's fighting and sword fighting and all that kind of stuff. But there was one scene that was rather graphic with an infant body on top of a pile of human bodies with a giant spear going through the infant. So it was traumatic as a parent to think of that. So yeah, like I said, just, a little warning there that there is some crazy stuff mentioned in there at the beginning. What frustrates me as a whole with this series is the inundation of information. I really wish that magic information and backstory information was given as a sprinkle through the story instead of info dumps, because we do get a lot of info dumps through this. Now, ironically enough, even when you get into the second book called Eldest, the info dumps do not stop. They continue. But of course, like I said, we do get Eragon asking many straightforward questions for information about the magic system. And of course, he's getting, introduced to the magic system as he deals with it. But book 2 is really just the ultimate side quest. He's on one mission according to book 1. In book 2, you have a massive side quest where he needs to gain experience. What also kind of frustrates me about the transition from book 1 to book 2 is one of the primary characters who is discussed throughout the series and is a major influence on Eragon's life is taken out of the story pretty much by the middle of book 1. So if he was such an important part and he was a primary mentor of Eragon, I would expect to get a lot more screen time with him. We needed to know what happened with their time together. And so a lot of that is brushed over. We kind of have a quick little training montage, and then the story continues. So that was awkward. And it makes it so that Eragon, you kind of lose track of time at that point with exactly how much time has passed between Eragon getting into the whole fact that he's a dragon rider and then learning so much from his mentor. Because when he learns from that mentor, we don't get to actually see those lessons or the whole sitting around the campfire in the evening. So in book 2, we're being told that there's a lot of stuff that this mentor did not tell him. And it seems strange, because if they spent so much time together, you would expect those kinds of topics to come up in normal conversation. So there's certain things like that where I know they're trying to keep some of the mystery so that we find it out over the series. But I really wish that we had that mentor character at least all the way through the first book. And then, maybe even a little bit into the second. I understand why they removed his character, but at the same time, it really would have been helpful to get more experience with that mentor character. Something else that was really disconjoining for the story, or at least, took it out of reality for me, um, is that apparently Aragon learned how to read in like a week and a half, 2 weeks. In just like a few days, this guy learns how to read. Not totally realistic there, especially, I'm glad that he is older. So it's not like you're trying to teach, a 6-year-old how to read in a week or two. But still, because it is a language, and he essentially also is learning multiple languages, because just like I said, he has to deal with the ancient language when it comes to magic, and then the language that he already speaks for day to day, he's only learning his everyday language. He's not learning the ancient language when it comes to reading, which seems strange because like I said, it kind of seems like he would need some kind of notebook to keep with himself to understand the ins and outs of the magic system that he's dealing with. He gets a lot of hands-on experience, but at the same time, when you're learning something that intricate and your life is at stake, it really seems like, something simple like a notebook would be important. Just to kind of keep track of that. And we do get multiple points of view in these books. The first book, you get Eragon as well as his cousin. And in the second book, we get an extra person as a point of view. So that was nice to kind of catch up with that character. It helped, actually. They are happening at the same time. So it's not like there's any jumps in time that happen with those. And it is information that I think is important for the reader to have. So that was kind of nice too. We get a lot of new characters in the second book. And it also seems like the romantic subplot really takes over Eldest, the second book in the series. There's a romantic interest who is introduced in book 1. And by the time we get into book 2, it is just absolutely chock full of this possible relationship and going back and forth between it. And Eragon, again, acting very childish in a lot of situations. And ironically enough, also, I should also mention this, because the covers of the books are the faces of dragons. If you do not have the movie cover for the first book, the covers are dragon faces. So when I saw that the first book was called Eragon, I thought that the dragon's name was Eragon. I did not realize that Eragon was actually the human who was the dragon rider. My mistake, but an honest mistake. So when you get to the second book, Eldest is not the name of this dragon, as far as I know. Like I said, I haven't read all the way to the end of the second book, so I'm just guessing at this point. I don't know. We'll find out along the way. But there is so much info dumping in here, as long as romantic subplot, which is weird because the kid who suggested this book series specifically, we had multiple conversations about the fact that it's frustrating when YA books allow the romantic subplot to overtake the primary plot, and the fact that readers of that age bracket really aren't as interested in the romantic subplots as authors seem to think that they are. So it's strange, but it's also very frustrating. I'm glad to see that the romantic interest introduced into this book is not head over heels for Eragon. So there is a little bit of back and forth kind of things there. We also learn a little bit more about his dragon's background, which is really great. Because again, it was information that was missing in that first book. We start to also get, ironically enough, jumps over certain parts of information. So we're told at one point that Eragon learns 12 different ways to kill someone. And I was like, well, that's something I would be interested in hearing about. What are the 12 ways? And they don't tell you. And then in another scene later on, they tell you that he used one of those 12 ways to kill something. And I'm sitting there going, well, if you were going to explain anything, I would love to know how he killed that thing. So it's weird things like that. We also find out more about our monster characters from book 1. So we find out more about the Razak. We find more about the Urgles. We also get a new mentor because, of course, mentor was removed from the first book. We also get a new mentor who is introduced, who also encourages Eragon to look at things from different perspectives. So that's very refreshing to see, because we get such a tunnel vision going with the world that Eragon has built around him. I am very glad that we got that new teacher and people to help kind of challenge this guy, because Eragon and his dragon don't often get challenged like they should be. They need to be able to fall on their faces, especially the dragon that we have. There's no real learning curve for that dragon. So that was frustrating. You have to have these characters go through trials and tribulations. Allowing them to simply just become great at what they do doesn't make you feel excited when they accomplish something, because they've always accomplished things, right? And book 2 is where we really have our, Eragon tripping on his face. We only get to see really twice of when his dragon makes any mess up. I am hoping that we see a little bit more of that, just to make those characters a bit more relatable. As far as Eragon himself, I have to say he's a bit of a whiny guy. He's not very mature overall, which is interesting. I do kind of wish that he had a bit more maturity. And it's even ironic too, because one of his mentor characters even mentions, oh, you're growing so much, you're maturing a lot. And then in the next scene, oh, no, he's not. He's back to himself. We do have a lot of things that could be foreshadow, or at least open up the possibility of really cool things being included in the series. I haven't seen a lot of those taken advantage of, which is upsetting. It's disappointing, because we have a lot of really cool stuff introduced as concepts, or, if he learns how to do this, okay, well, maybe he's going to use that later. Or if there are plants, especially, that are introduced with certain properties, and they talk about that in the story, about how certain mushrooms or certain plants or certain flowers have these abilities. I really want to see our character utilize that somewhere later in the story. So there's a lot of stuff here that I'm looking for. Again, am I expecting everything to be perfect? No. It was written so long ago, and again, by a teenager, and I haven't checked the acknowledgments to see really like who his editor was at the time, how all of that went. And I don't know exactly how long it took him to write all this. So I have homework to do in that area as well. But like I said, I'm just reading the series and giving kind of my feedback on that. So there's a lot of stuff here. I am excited to see where the series goes. The one biggest thing that I have a huge issue with is that we never directly meet the primary antagonist. We don't get to meet the villain face to face. The Urkels and the Radzak as characters are really just like the henchmen of the primary villain that we have. And that's really frustrating. And it's difficult to stay motivated to, see what the primary conflict is there with those characters when you don't actually get to meet the guy. And I have heard from others, again, this is a major spoiler, I have heard from others that we will not meet the primary villain until about the end of book 4. To say that is frustrating is a serious understatement. That's just crazy to me. We needed to have some kind of direct contact with the primary villain, and we don't get that in these 2 books, which I'm really sad about. So, dealing with, that's like dealing with a villain's secretary the entire time, but he never actually shows up for the fight. That's what we're dealing with here, which is sad. I really wish that we had more character building on that, because I think that would help readers, and especially readers like myself, connect better with the series if we felt like we were actually dealing with a real situation. Because right now it's just hypothetical situations that the characters are going through, because there's no direct contact with that villain. We need that. We really, really need that. So there was recently an announcement that there is now a 5th book in the series called Murtagh. He is one of the characters introduced in book 1, and he goes through some of book 2. a very cool character, and you kind of figure out the connections between Murtaugh and Eragon in the first two books as well. So I am excited to see where that series goes. Will I read book 5? Probably. Am I doing it willingly and excited? No. Just because I want to know what happens. I want to know what we do with this character. He seemed pretty interesting, and then he kind of faded out to the side. So I'm glad that he's being brought back. Do I want to wait 2.5 more books to get there? No, but I guess that's really our only option. So we'll see kind of how that goes. But it is a very interesting series of books. Am I glad that I'm reading them? Yeah, I am. They're very interesting. The world building is definitely there. It's just that I wish it was done in a more fluid manner as opposed to the info dumps that we get, because you get a lot of also very frivolous information that, again, if it's not going to be applicable directly with something, we really just don't need it. And as one of my very good friends, Maria, who's an amazing writer, would say, you can write the scene for yourself and then remove it from the manuscript, just so that you know the information. That is great, but if your reader doesn't need it, go ahead and delete it from the work. And I really wish that would have been done here, because it really would have tightened up the books themselves. The story would have been much tighter if we took out a lot of those info dumps and just introduced the information that the reader directly needs. So far it's going well. If I had to grade it out of 5 stars so far, I would probably give the series 3.5 stars with where we're at right now. There are a lot of things I think that could be improved, but it does have a very solid base. So we'll see how it continues, and I will give you guys an update on that later. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I will talk to y'all in the next episode.